Welcome, esteemed spectators, to the journey of decoding the most magnificent mystery. Over 2,000 years ago, a genius mind bravely challenged the mighty Roman Empire. With giant mechanical machines and fatal beams of light, he turned the sea into a grand tomb. But that absolute peak of glory concluded with a deeply tragic farewell upon the pale sand. Is this a truly terrifying historical truth, or merely an exaggerated ancient myth? In summer 214 BC, the great city of Syracuse stood in absolute silence. In a bright room, Archimedes passionately drew geometric curves upon the pale golden sand. According to historian Plutarch, he was a supreme and highly eccentric, brilliant mind. To this 75-year-old genius, mechanical engineering was just a simple pastime. However, the pure tranquility of mathematics was ruthlessly shattered by the Roman Empire. General Marcellus led a colossal fleet of warships, entirely obscuring the bright horizon. The Roman Republic desired to conquer Sicily to achieve complete mastery over the sea. Hundreds of giant warships bearing proud eagle emblems majestically sailed into the Grand Bay. Heavily armed Roman soldiers firmly believed the limestone walls would rapidly crumble to dust. They brought giant siege towers, fully prepared to crush any pathetic remaining resistance. General Marcellus stood proudly upon the ship's bow, an arrogant smile clearly on his face. He had no idea that his true formidable opponent was not a massive army. The most terrifying foe of the mighty empire was merely a frail and skinny old man. Archimedes quietly stepped out of the room, casting a piercing cold gaze down at the dark sea. The arrogance of the Roman legion would soon be fiercely punished by the power of knowledge. Massive pulley machines were hiding in the shadows behind the incredibly sturdy stone walls. The entire foundation of physics and spatial geometry was transformed into a weapon. Thousands of Syracorder militias braced themselves, entirely ready to obey the old man's command. A terrifying storm of cold metal and oak was about to strike the greedy invaders. The most devastating siege in ancient world history officially began at this moment. A fierce naval attack erupted, flying arrows completely covering the once silent blue sky. Roman warships approached the walls, preparing to lower siege ladders to storm inside quickly. At that exact moment, a wooden and iron nightmare suddenly descended from the heavens. It was the claw of Archimedes, a giant and complex system of levers and pulleys. Giant sharp iron hooks, the size of a human body, dropped from behind the steep cliff summit. They precisely clamped onto the warship bows, completely piercing the sturdy Roman oak layers. Standing on the high tower, Archimedes signaled for hundreds of soldiers to pull the ropes. Applying the magnificent law of leverage, the machine slowly lifted the heavy ship. Roman soldiers slid across the tilting deck, screaming in utter terror and deep despair. When the massive ship was suspended midair, the thick ropes were suddenly released to drop. The fierce impact against the water snapped the warship in half, sinking it instantly. Thousands of soldiers tumbled into the churning waters, weighed down by heavy iron armor. General Marcellus watched in utter shock as his strong fleet was easily devastated. Imperial pride rapidly transformed into sheer terror, facing an invisible force.
Grant us your shadow.
That lifeless machine seemed to possess a soul, ruthlessly swallowing all attack efforts. Raw muscle power and military discipline completely fell to supreme intellect. The Romans truly believed they were battling against ferocious supernatural monsters. They were forced to pull the entire Grand Fleet away from shore to escape the claw's reach. If you were that proud Roman general, what would you do facing a humiliating defeat? However, retreating from shore pushed the legion into an even more horrific demise zone. A fiery summer passed, the glaring Mediterranean sun fully scorching the battlefield. Archimedes once again harnessed nature's sheer power to forge a devastating miracle. Along the massive stone wall, numerous hexagonal bronze mirrors were arranged in a cone shape. Perfectly polished bronze shields were precisely stacked to form a massive reflective surface. Archimedes squinted under the blazing sun, carefully adjusting the light convergence angle. The fierce sunbeams strongly reflected, converging into a blinding and brilliant heat point. Ancient historical records state this was the fatal beam turning everything into mere ash. The focal point shone directly upon linen sails and ship decks heavily coated with thick tar. White smoke began rising from the Roman vessels, anchored hundreds of meters away from shore. Just minutes later, fierce flames erupted, incinerating the entire wooden oak structure. Marcellus watched in horror as his fleet ignited without a single arrow being fired. Thousands of sailors hastily plunged into the deep sea to escape the merciless scorching fire. This remote devastation delivered a heavy mental blow to the massive invading army's spirit. Yet, modern scientists continue to fiercely debate regarding this fearful superweapon. Tests show that burning wooden ships remotely requires a gigantic and completely still mirror. However, extreme heat and glare from those giant mirrors are certainly real in history. It blinded Roman sailors, broke formations, and sparked ultimate panic upon the ocean surface. A single brilliant mind trapped a mighty army for 2 continuously agonizing years. Tell me, does the mighty power of human intellect have any truly impassable boundaries? But history holds ironic turns, and all grand glory must ultimately fade away. By autumn 212 BC, the resilient stone walls had finally crumbled in defeat. Sisrakar fell not from poor technology, but through the tragic carelessness of its own people. During a sacred religious festival night, the defensive guards heavily neglected their duties. Romans sneaked across a narrow wall section, secretly opening the mightiest fortress gates. The dark was shattered by blazing torches, as clashing swords fiercely echoed through every city street. A ruthless and tragic reckoning abruptly descended upon the innocent, suffering people. Amidst the severe chaos, Marcellus hastily issued an extremely strict military command. He ordered troops to capture Archimedes alive, strictly forbidding any harm to the brilliant mind. Marcellus deeply craved this supreme intellect to serve the massive ambitions of his empire. Meanwhile, in a quiet, stained courtyard, Archimedes was leaning heavily over the dusty ground. The exhausted old man in torn clothes kept his eyes firmly glued to the geometric sand shapes. Suddenly, an unknown Roman soldier kicked open the door, aggressively charging straight inside. His fiercely drawn sword pointed directly at the throat of the era's greatest mathematician. He brutally trampled the sand, ruining the priceless equation lines that were just created. Archimedes angrily shouted, demanding the rude soldier not to disturb his precious circles. Scientific obsession made him forget the fatal blade threatening his fragile existence. Furious at the elder's arrogance, the soldier ruthlessly delivered a tragic final strike. His vital essence flowed onto the dry sand, erasing the unfinished brilliant theorem. The greatest ancient genius tragically fell to blind ignorance and devastating cruelty. Marcellus entered the scene in shock, bowing his head in deep sorrow before the ruined scholar. The Roman general's belated regret could never compensate for humanity's monumental loss. Though his form vanished, his mathematical legacy steadily illuminates the world to this day. Is his invention a brilliant miracle or merely a brutal weapon of utter destruction? Far in the distant east, a ruthless tyrant builds massive underground machine. Who could it be? Subscribe, like, and share the video to uncover our next thrilling historical mysteries.